Partner now.
Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Voice the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me tonight is Dr. Joy Jeffries Pugh. And she's got a book out that, unless I messed up her title of the book, it's called Eden, The Knowledge of Good and Evil 666, that I saw over at Amazon that got my interest. So I decided I would contact her and invite her to my show, and she's graciously accepted, and she's here with me now, and I'm fixing to give her a little quick well, I'm introducing her now, in fact, but we're fixing to get her on the air and let her tell a little something about what got her involved in this here. And we're going to talk about this here book, which she also got another book out that deals with the Antichrist and a Jesus clone, and I may be getting that one mixed up. I've only seen it briefly while I was preparing her show promotion, and I'm going to let her correct me on that one if I'm wrong. But as I understand it, these two books are like a follow-up one of the other, or connected, or different parts of each other, or something to that deal. So I thought we could bring those in for a bigger picture, if it's okay with her. That is Dr. Joy, correct?
That's right.
Okay, just making sure. I know I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, and pardon me, I got that little frog right when I was speaking to you. But I was going to say, I make mistakes, so I always try to ask people to correct me if I do. And I was just going to say, why don't you start this ball rolling? And, oh, by the way, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I think it was very nice of you to agree, especially since you didn't know me from Adam.
Well, you know, Royce, there's a lot of times that I do shows and I don't really have the opportunity to always know the host. But I always feel like that if someone's doing a radio show, that they really are typically looking to try to find truth in what they are pursuing. It's no different than the research that I do all the time. My intent is never to be doing anything to just do it for fun. It's more of a quest. And I think when, for example, yourself and other people out there that try to do radio shows, their intent, I believe, is to do the same thing, is that you have a quest and you're wanting to find answers to some really tough problems. And that's really what my research is all about, trying to find answers to some really, really tough questions that over the period of humanity, for a long, long time, we've had so many questions that we could not have answered. And I'm the type of person that I just want to know the truth. It doesn't matter to me what the truth is, as long as it is the truth. And so when I started pursuing my research, I really wanted to erase any prior, I guess, thought processes that I had come to terms with based on what other people maybe had told me as a child growing up, or bedtime stories or whatever, that we typically will build foundations on for our future beliefs. And to try to tear down the walls and start really fresh and from the beginning is what prompted me to find out a lot of the answers that I had always wondered about, but just couldn't put the pieces of the puzzle together because the foundation that I had, I guess, laid my thoughts and belief on, it was not so much that it was wrong, it was just that sometimes theory and someone telling a story, they maybe didn't tell the whole story, or they didn't have all the pieces to the puzzle to really make an informed a theory, or either to prove something. And I've been fortunate that when I've been able to do radio shows, that it seems like, again, like yourself, that the intent is to try to bring the truth forward. And
right.
We are dealing with something that in your show specifically, paranormal, it is something that I deal with all the time because the spiritual world is very real. And I laugh many times because on a lot of paranormal shows, I'm like, people say, well, you're a Christian. What are you doing on a paranormal show? And I'm like, excuse me, but if you have read the Bible from start to finish.
Angels, miracles, and...
I said, really, the Bible is the most paranormal book that I really have ever read, because you're talking about ghosts, you're talking about somebody walking on the water, you're talking about snakes turning into rods and rods turning into snakes, and you're talking about a serpent that's talking to Eve, you're talking about people being raised from the dead, you're talking about people being taken up in a wheel, you're talking about people who are taken who never die, and you're talking about demons that run into pigs and drown themselves. I mean, people walking on water, it's amazing. And then you talk about angels and them on earth and that they've had children. I mean, I can't think of anything more paranormal than all of that, because if anything, like I say, all the research that I've done in a lot of paranormal books, I don't think I've ever come across one that's quite as paranormal as the Bible really, really is. And it's unfortunate because people want to try to take it in a different direction.
Right.
But I think if we start with a foundation and we learn what was given to us in the very beginning, why it was given to us, then it helps us explain what are these strange things that happen around us that we really don't have an answer to. And my research is about that. And you mentioned that my first book was Antichrist, the Cloned Image of Jesus Christ.
That one, yes, that's the one I was referring to.
And the thing about that particular book, I had always wanted to find these answers for myself, and I never dreamed that I would get the chance to be on a radio show or talk about my research. I was doing these things to really answer questions that I had, because I felt like, because I had a strange little dream when I was about 6 years of age, that I felt like I saw the end of the world. And when I went to church, and I was always brought up in church, went actually to the same church I go to right now. I was there the week that I was born, and was very involved in church, and really saw what it's like to really worship and be committed. But at the same time, small Southern Baptist country church in a small town with a small library. When I had this dream, I couldn't find answers to what I had seen. And it's really before there was anything really, I think, written out there other than the book of Revelation that would have explained a little bit of what I had actually had in this dream that had troubled me so. And as time went on, and I would ask questions, I would have adults say, well, now, you're just over-worrying. That's not for children to think about. You just need to let that go and go on outside and play. And people encouraged me not to think about it. I don't think that it was wrong maybe for them to do that, but I found myself, instead of being more outward with people, I began to be more inward, because it was something that I felt that God had either showed me that I was needing to know about, and that it would drive me even through my college days in studying things, because most girls never dreamed about growing up to be a preacher. I mean, that was something that was only really, quote, a man's job when I was born and raised.
Yeah, same here.
In a small community. You didn't have women preachers. So my intent when I went to college was not that I could even go into the ministry, although I would say that it has always been my first thing in my life. Because when I would do my research for other classes and things, especially like if I did speeches, I would preach in speech class. When I got up to do my speech, I was actually preaching. So, which I laugh at sometimes and think back, but it was a way for me to study the things that I wanted to study and say the things I wanted to say. And so I began doing a lot of thesis in college in regard to this religious thing about the end of time, and people would say, well, you're engrossed with this or whatever, and I would think to myself, yes, I am very engrossed in it, because I truly believe that this is going to happen in our lifetime, and that I've seen part of it, and I want to know, I want to be prepared myself, not so much that I was wanting to prepare anybody else, but at the time it was so important for me to find answers to these questions. And when I had the opportunity to write the first book, this Antichrist book, back in 1999, I had really been doing research for many, many years. Really, like I say, probably the first book that ever came out that just absolutely made me know that what I had seen in this dream was going to come to pass, because it made sense, was that Hal Lindsey wrote a book called The Late Great Planet Earth. And I read that book. Yes, I read that book when I was like 12 or 13, somewhere in that period of time. And it just absolutely answered to me the thought processes that he had come forward with in his book really was what I had felt that I had witnessed in seeing the earth being totally destroyed and all these things happening. And so, I would go to work. I worked with handicapped people for many, many, many years. And, I would be sitting around the conference table with all of my staff. I had like 30-something staff. And we would be talking about something, and all of a sudden I would say, "Did you hear on the news about so-and-so and so-and-so?" And they would look at me so funny. And I'd say, "I really need to write a book about that." And it was just driving me. And then my mother came down with cancer. And I really needed to stay and look after her and take her to chemotherapy and that kind of thing. And she always laughed and said that God took me away and put me kind of in prison to make me do what he was really leading me to do. Because at that point in time, I would take books with me while she was taking chemo, and I would read. And then at night, when I got home, I would kind of, mark pages, and I was getting all what I felt was answers to all these questions that I had really in my mind. And one day I was driving down the road with my grandmother, and it just came to me exactly what was going to happen at the end of time with this particular man that would be called the Antichrist. And I actually slammed on brakes, pulled off the side of the road, and she's like, what's going on? And she had been there from the very beginning, back when I was 6 years of age, when I had woke up and went to her and told her the dream and how upsetting it was and that kind of thing. And so she had always known that my passion was this. And I just looked at her and I said, "Mommy," I said, "I know how the Antichrist is going to pull this off, because it always worried me in the Bible that the elect would be very deceived at the end of time, and that, Jesus had also said that there will come other people in my name, and don't jump at them being called Jesus, that you need to be very cautious about that." I had been doing some research at that time on cloning, and I'd found out some information. I got my hands on some books in little South Georgia town in regard to Hitler, and found that he had some activity going on, being able to really do some cloning. And when I started doing the research on that, I found that really the first cloning took place with a frog back in the 1800s. And I'm like, this is not a new science. There's something very much really to all this. And why was Hitler trying to perfect these genes? And what was he doing to get rid of the Jewish people? Why was that so important? And then I began to see that in my research at the time, that there was a difference between the typical Jew that we know, or what I was led to believe. I thought a Jew was a Jew. I didn't realize that the original 12 tribes that were the Hebrews only became termed as Jews when they actually went into Babylonian captivity, and they had children by Gentiles and whatever different than just those 12 tribes, and so they had to have a name for that kind of setup. But the original Israelites, apparently some of them had markers in their genetic structure that would actually, they could find out, who was a true, I guess you would say, of that 12 tribe. And so I began to see that there was a reason that Hitler was killing some so-called Jewish people, while he was letting other people, Jewish people, leave and set up this place called Israel. And at that point in time, a couple of years, maybe 10 years before that, my dad had brought in a picture, and I can't remember, I would love to still have it, Royce, that was probably either from Look or Life magazine, because those were the two big magazines in the day when I was growing up, that actually showed the Shroud of Turin. And most people, if they don't know about the Shroud of Turin that might be listening to the show tonight, I do encourage you to either go to my website at www.drjoye, that's joy with an E.com.
I was going to do that.
and
I'm glad you did, thanks.
Okay, and look at the Shroud of Turin, because I do have some pictures on there, but you can also Google Shroud of Turin, and you can get a lot of information on that particular piece of cloth. But I remember seeing that as a child, and Royce, when Dad brought that in, I just busted out crying, and he's like, "What in the world? What?" And I'm like, it's Jesus. It's Jesus. And he's like, "Well, they don't know that. They're doing some research on it. They think it is his burial cloth." And I'm like, "No, this is Jesus. It's Jesus." And I just got really hyped up, and he's like, "Why? Why would you say?" And I'm like, Daddy, I saw this man. This is the man that I saw in my dream when I was little. And so from the very get-go, I had a different, theory or belief in the Shroud of Turin that might be different than the average person who has heard all the research where it's been proven as authentic, then it would be proven as a possible fake, and then all these other controversies would come up and it would be kind of left in limbo. The Shroud of Turin is the most researched relic in all of history. There is no other piece of history or relic that has ever been researched like the Shroud of Turin. I mean, there's major research, and I don't think a lot of people realize how much has gone into this. But the fact that I really saw what I believe Jesus looked like, and the fact that the person on that shroud looks like what I saw, I never doubted the authenticity of that particular cloth. So when doing the research before 1999, I had just come to the terms that cloth was in fact very real. But how was I going to really try to prove that it was real when nobody else could prove it, other than the fact that the Stirrup Committee had actually in 1968, and then after that period of time, had actually come forward and said that this cloth does contain what they truly believed was a crucified man from that period of time when Jesus was here on earth. But when when this revelation came to me with my grandmother, I had always wanted to know, well, how would it be that you could fake a lot of people out at the end of time, that this person called the Antichrist or the Beast would come to power and people would believe that it was the Messiah. And I'm like, what would be able to do that? And like I say, all of a sudden it was just in my head. And I pulled over and I told her, I looked at her and I said, Mommy, if you could clone somebody. And she heard me talking about cloning and that kind of thing. And back when I was talking about it, it was science fiction. Nobody was talking about really doing that other than probably down in the bowels of the earth where they do all these strange experiments. But I asked her, I said, who would you clone if you could clone anybody? And she said her mother, because her mother died when she was really a small girl, and she said, I'd give anything to have spent time with my mother, but she was very sick and I never really knew her. And I said, well, no, if you could clone anybody, if you had the power and the money and the backing and the ability to put a man like that on this earth, who would you clone? And she kind of looked at me bewildered, and I said, how about Jesus? I said, if you think about it, that one being would be able to come forth with life and cure everything. He could heal everybody. He could do all these wonderful things, and we would not have this sadness and this tragedy. And, of course, with my mother having cancer, I looked at her and I said, can you imagine if he could heal Mother? She would never have to die. So right then, she looked at me very funny, and I said, but the problem is that I don't think that it will be Jesus when they do it. It's going to be a vehicle, because that cloning will not allow the spirit or the breath to live in it. And I looked at her and I said, the Antichrist is going to live inside of it. And she just, she was just blown away, because I had tears in my eyes, because I'm like, it's absolutely fulfilling what the Book of Revelation is telling us about. So when I got back home, I began putting the book together, this Antichrist, the cloned image of Jesus Christ. And after that period of time, of course, my research just escalated, because now I had the foundation of understanding what was about to occur and that it was about to happen in our lifetime. And Royce, it was kind of funny because, my mother was taking chemo, and the guy that was really over her chemo and stuff, I gave him one of the books, and he came back and he was like, cloning. He said, we don't, in medical terms, he said this, and this, and he was going on. He said, I don't think we can do this and this. And I would say, well, you haven't done the research on it. Let me show you this. And we began to have conversations with each other about that. And it was amazing, because then, after I had already done all the research, then, of course, we know that they come out and they have Dolly and the cloning and the whole 9 yards that's going on with the fact that we now have a sheep and it's alive and it came from an udder cell. It's not through typical sexual formation. It's asexual.
And didn't the Redians try to clone somebody and got in trouble legally for it?
Well, right, and there was those people that tried to do that. But Royce, the thing about it is, Hitler was doing this. So we're not talking about the 1990s when I was starting to do this, my writing on my book. We're talking about years before that somebody had already figured this out, because, like I say, the first frog was like I think it's 1849 or something. I have to look it back up. It's in like the 1800s. The cloning issue is nothing, because the moment that we learned how to do artificial insemination, cloning became the easiest thing in the world to be able to do. I mean, cloning is just not hard to do. In fact, I have even mentioned in my book Eden, which came after Antichrist, and the main thing I want people to know is Antichrist led into Eden. Eden, the knowledge of good and evil that was released later, really brings that information into the forefront of this book and expands it. The book that I'm presently actually getting a contract with for tomorrow, it's supposed to come in the mail tomorrow for my new book, it is even going to expand even more on what I'm doing, because if you get the foundation, this is so important, if you get the foundation of what's happening in our world, then you can build on it. And I have seen how my research has gone from, before Antichrist, I did a thesis in a couple of my college classes that was actually called Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. And I did that for my master's, and then I also did another one for my doctorate. And I built on that, and then, of course, when I did Antichrist, the clone image of Jesus, it was even more information, because things were starting to happen. When I started putting the pieces of the puzzle together when I was little, I'm talking about before I even read Hal Lindsey, there was just pieces you could find every now and then. Then I read Hal Lindsey, then I started reading the book of Revelation, and then I started doing more and more research and finding different little, what I call nuggets hidden, that I could bring together and actually prove the movement of time, that we were beginning what I call the birth pains. In other words, where things had been happening only in rare instances, things began to start coming together closer and closer. And now, when I do research, my research is daily, because things are happening so much today that are biblically important, where even when I did Eden all those years ago, when I did Antichrist all those years ago, I may have to look for months and find maybe one thing. And today, I can almost look on the Internet and find something daily. So I guess what I'm saying is that I can take people from just the Book of Eden and expand that, because what I'm doing now is just more and more and more. I mean, it's almost that you can't contain it all in one book, because there's so much information out there that is vital to understand. And so I kind of have done people's research for them, because there's so much out there.
Oh, yeah.
And I've tried to put it into one book so that you don't have to go out and read. Like I have a huge library. I read all the time. There's not a day that goes by that my head is not in a book. I did not trust the Internet too much, because lots of times people will use things and say things, and they have not done the research. So, when I have a book in my hand, and not an e-book and not a downloaded book, but the physical book, my books, if you go in my library, the pages are all turned down, they're marked, they're written all over. I mean, they're research. It is major research. And so, in doing the two projects of Antichrist and then, of course, Eden, and then, of course, doing the one that I have just now completed and we'll get a contract like I said, in the mail tomorrow. I'm really excited about it. So I don't know how long it takes for production. Usually it takes 6-7 months, and depending on, production and distribution and all that stuff that publishers do, it can take a little while to get that out. But I guess what I'm saying is that in my research, I would encourage people, because my Antichrist book it was only so many copies, and so that's a collector's item. I'm never going to issue that book other than let it stay as a collector's item. So if you don't have that book, then I would encourage you to get Eden, because Eden incorporates what's in Antichrist. and that you can get the foundation laid to the work that I'm doing and then build upon it, when
Right.
my other books come out, and it would help you even expand more knowledge. But we're living in very unique times, Royce, and I think that, again, paranormal is more prevalent today with the spiritual world than it's ever been. And I have found that the Bible tells us it's going to be like the days of Noah. And before the flood, which, unfortunately a lot of Christians don't know, these fallen angels were coming down to earth, and Genesis is quite clear about that. They were mating and having sex with human women. And what they produced was a DNA giant that if it had just been what God had created between Adam and Eve, then their DNA was perfect, because you have to remember that Eve was not a created being like anything else. Eve was quite unusual. There's nobody else in the Bible that was ever taken from something else.
Right.
And she literally was taken from the rib of Adam. And when you do the research in regard to finding the DNA, if we had to take DNA out of somebody, the rib is the best place to get it.
Also,
So there. Go ahead.
I'm sorry about that, Joe. I was just going to say real quick, like when you were mentioning the DNA and Adam and Eve, a lot of people don't get this, and I'm quite sure that you do because you've done the study on it. But, if you stop and think about it, there was originally could have only been one blood type. If there was Adam, Eve was taken from Adam, there had to be one original blood type, whether it be A positive, O negative, O positive, or, whatever. So somehow, new blood got introduced from somewhere else, which I would say would probably be Genesis 6:4, when the angels descended. Now, we don't have no way of knowing if O positive or O negative was interjected. We have no way of knowing when A and B made their way into the grouping. But, doesn't something tell you if the Bible's right and it was originally Adam and Eve, then for so many different blood types to abound, there had to be a reason for it?
Well, I think that's it, and that's what I mentioned earlier about having your foundation laid on what the Bible says and not on some bedtime story. It's unfortunate that, for example, the Adam and Eve thing, I had always believed that Adam and Eve, they ate a piece of fruit, and unfortunately God told them not to eat that fruit, and that's why they were put out of the garden, that this strange little guy called serpent, and it's always pictured as a snake, had actually enticed Eve to eat this fruit. Great Bible story for a child, but if you've laid your foundation on that, you've missed a lot. Because when I went back and, like I say, kind of tore down the walls and sat down on my own, and I had never heard anything called a serpent seed. That thought process had never entered my mind, and I had never read anything about that. One day I was reading that story, and I kept going back over it and back over it. I was like, okay, this is very strange. This serpent is not a snake. This serpent is talking. I don't know of any snakes that talk, but this being was talking. And the fact that Eve would even have a conversation with him, let me just say, if a snake starts talking to you, would you stand around and go, hello, how are you doing? Well, it's good to see you. Have a piece of fruit. You would be going exit stage left because the snake's talking to you. So it tells you that she was not afraid. There was something quite interesting about him, and the fact that he was smarter than she was. That something about him was very enticing. And so I started looking at the words like beguiled, and what does that mean? Hoodwinked and deceived. And then I went back, and something I had never paid attention to. Before we even introduced to that serpent, we are told there is an institution of marriage that God created. And he says that he married Adam and Eve. They were not ashamed, and they were naked. Nowhere does it say, go and be fruitful and multiply. It says that when the first male and female were actually created in the first part of Genesis. But that female was not taken from a rib. They were told to create to go and multiply and replenish the earth. When I realized that there was an institution of marriage for Adam and Eve that doesn't exist with any other animal, I began to understand what the Bible was telling me when I'm doing the research on the bride and the bridegroom coming at the end of time for his bride. And that the institution of marriage and adultery and whoredom, there's this thread that goes all the way through the Bible about how terrible, terrible, terrible that is. I mean, you just keep hearing all these things about 666s. And I'm like, wow, God's got a real problem with that. Yet he created us to have sex, didn't he? And then I began to really sit there and look at this. And then all of a sudden, I reread that again with Adam and Eve and the serpent. And it says that when God cursed that serpent, he cursed his seed. Well, where is that seed at? And why is he only dealing with the curse with Eve and that serpent? And I tell you, Royce, I sat there and I absolutely cried because it was a revelation. I honestly thought nobody had ever figured that out. And I'm like, my gracious, this is what happened. They had sex, and they had a child. There's a seed. So I tell you, that was like, I had to sit back and just go, Lord, I never understood this. But this explains to me why whoredom is throughout this Bible, why mixing has been told you don't do that, and why you told your own people, Moses and all of them, to kill every woman, child, human, even animal that was not of that lineage, get them off the face of the earth. And why those giants were destroying everything. It just, all of a sudden, it clicked. Up until that time, the rest of it had been kind of Bible stories. But boy, when you get to the understanding that there was a sexual relationship going on, and that first child that came into the world named Cain, the reason his name was acquired, because Cain means acquired, was that it was not of the seed of promise, which was the seed between Adam and Eve. Cain was a seed of pleasure. And pleasure was never supposed to be a part of sex. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my gracious, does this just open up a can of worms, but does it ever explain why in the end of days people aren't married? There's no reason for marriage in heaven. The fact that the tree of knowledge of good and evil doesn't exist there anymore in the end of time. The fact that the whoredom, the whore of Babylon, all that stuff, why it's all so bad is because it mixes good with evil. And when God set up everything, he said to each thing he created, you go and you replenish after your kind. He says, after your kind. The fact that Eve and the serpent had a relationship meant that they created a being that was not after their kind. And once you start looking at what the Bible tells you, it says that Satan was the first murderer. And I couldn't ever figure that out. I'm like, well, the first murderer was Cain. Why does it say that Satan was the first murderer? And I've heard people say, well, it's the spirit. And I'm like, oh. But if it was his son, he would have the DNA traits of that particular individual. And then I began doing the genetics and stuff and testing of, what was it saying as far as what happened with Cain's lineage. And you start finding out they're the ones that are doing the eventual mixing. And they're the ones that are learning how to do things that mess up the earth, like build cities and wall cities and things like that. You don't ever hear that from what God wanted his people to do here on this earth. It was created in his perfection. It was not created to be manipulated or changed. But Satan did that. he changed what God had created. It was a way to get back. And, you know, I had always heard that people would say that the sons of God and the sons of man, you know, that separated what Cain was versus what Adam and Eve were. But if Cain and Abel were not different, then how was it that you ever created a giant? Because like we mentioned earlier, your DNA would have remained the same. It would have never been tainted. It would have never produced anything like a giant.
Exactly.
And we know from the Bible, those guys had like 6 fingers on one hand and 6 toes on one foot. And I do know because I actually had someone that worked with me one time that had 6 toes on both feet. And we thought it was, you know, we talked about it because I worked with handicapped people, and she was actually a teacher. And we just thought it was strange because we knew it was genetic. I mean, we see, especially in handicapped people, you find that, you know, Down syndrome and other kinds of things, they will follow a pattern even for the male side or the female side, and some will have a problem and some won't have a problem, this, that, and the other. And so genetics had been something that I had studied a lot about. And the fact that we can look back and we can see after the flood that it says that there was a remnant that was still here, and we can look at the Bible and it tells about Og, and we know that David killed Goliath and how huge he was, and the Bible's very clear. Those beings were really big. And the funny thing is, Royce, you know, they really hide when they find these things archaeologically out there in the field. There's plenty of evidence of giants. There's huge skulls. There's huge, you know, physical bone structures that they have in many museums. The problem is they can't put them in line.
Their weapons and their tools. I mean, you're talking axes that stand twice as high as human beings. That's
right. And it makes sense when you start looking at things like Stonehenge and places like that, and you think, well, how do they move those big boulders? Well, if you've got a big man and you've got some of the creatures that, you know, that existed with those big giants, then it would have been nothing. No different than what we do when we're little like we are, and we are able to build skyscrapers and whatever. But I think it's just amazing that because these archaeological finds of the giants were kind of hidden and kept, you know, in the bottom basements of museums, because they couldn't put them in line with, unfortunately, Darwin's move from the ape into Homo erectus and Homo sapiens. They just said, well, you know, we just kind of keep them hid over there, and nobody really knows very much about it. But the thing that the Internet has done for us is that it has allowed us to do research. I mean, I do research with people all over the world. I would have never had this opportunity had it not been for the World Wide Web to actually be able to behold people who have discovered these certain bones and be able to look at them. And, you know, it is making science bring these things forward. They cannot hide it away from humanity like they have done in the past, because they couldn't have, let's say, perfect answers for what's going on here.
Too many prying eyes.
Well, yes, it is. And it really upsets me when you look at things like the Vatican. They have a huge monstrosity of a
library.
Library.
I heard that thing was like 52 miles long.
It is huge. It is huge, and it goes down into the earth, and I mean, you have to have clearance, and it is kept, let me just say, you could not just walk in there. And it's infuriating to me because I feel like the answers to a lot of things are there. The British Museum is another place where a lot of things are kept hidden in vaults, and even in the United States, you know, the Smithsonian. Unfortunately, the Smithsonian, I had not been in a couple of, probably 20 years, 30 years since I was a child, and had the chance to go back because I was on the History Channel and did a documentary up there. I was amazed at how old the stuff was in the Smithsonian that I had seen back when I was a little girl, and I'm like, where is all this new stuff? Where is the stuff that we're finding? Who's keeping this stuff hidden and away from prying eyes? Even the moon landing things are so dark that you can't hardly see in there, because what's happening is people have become so technologically smart that you go, well, now, you know, if we were on the moon and we were dressed in that, how is it that we weren't fried to a crisp when, you know, the gamma rays and whatever we hear about today, like the sun doing its thing and all the radiation, how did those guys survive up there like that? And you start questioning, were we there? Because you start going, do we have the capability to walk around in that kind of environment using what is sitting up there in the Smithsonian? I'm not so sure. I'm just not so 100% sure anymore. And when I saw how they had it so dimly lit, I'm like, maybe they're keeping it very dimly lit because they don't want you to really look at it very closely. And I think that may be the reason that some of the finds that we have are not put on display. Because there is an element of lineage that still exists from Cain. And I prove this in my book, Eden. That this lineage that started with the serpent became the kings and the rulers of humanity. Those people are different than the rest of us. They look like us, no different than the giants looked human, but they were not human as what God made you and I human. And they have maintained a perfect DNA that is different. It's very different than you and I, and they are so good at keeping this within themselves. They're thoroughbreds. They breed each other. They pick who they breed with. They never get away from who they are maintaining their DNA structures with. The thing is, it is what really Satan told Jesus. You know, he says, if you'll bow down to me, I'll put you, over the kingdoms of this earth. And of course, Jesus wouldn't listen to him when he was on this earth about that because his kingdom was not of this world. That's what he told Pilate. But it seems to me that the Bible's telling us that the people who rule this world are not of God. They are of Satan. And if you really do the research and you find out that the people who rule the world, who have the most money, who maintain and pull the strings around the world, they're all related. I mean, it gets to be creepy because they're all kind of coming from the same family. And they seem to have all the power. Well, if that's the case, then they keep things from the rest of us because what happens is there's more of us than there are of them. And
we easily outnumber them. Are you talking about the 13 satanic bloodlines I've read about by any chance?
Yes. Fitz, what's his last name? Anyway, he wrote a book called The 13 Illuminati Bloodlines.
I'd like to get him on my show, too.
His book, and I really enjoyed reading his research because, he has really been ostracized. I mean, he has really had to suffer because of the information that he put out publicly. And you're not going to find, big publishers rushing out to publish people like he or like myself because the big publishers are owned by those same people, just as the people who put out the major news networks, the radio shows. Most of the big ones, you can't get on to talk about these kinds of things because they don't want us to know these things. As long as they can kind of keep us over here and keep us quiet and maybe a little group talking over here. But if you could ever get on a world stage and go, look, this is what's going on, we're tired of it, you're not going to rule us like this. But the problem is we have gone so far now, Royce. They have now gotten so scientifically, technologically advanced that they can literally control us without ever having to really raise a gun at us. And in my book, Eden, I really explain this thing in our head that's called a pineal gland. This pineal gland is an antenna that exists in all of our heads. And biologically, if you jam it with electromagnetic waves, you can literally cause a biological response or a stimulus that you can't control your own body because something is controlling it. And I had often wondered why in the end of time there was only going to be 144,000 that were going to be sealed by God in their forehead that could stay on this earth after the bride was taken out to deal with an Antichrist. Now I know, because if that gland is not sealed in your forehead, the ability to utilize that gland is totally easy. The work started back in 1960 with Delgado when they were using this particular ELF wave, beaming it at people and causing them to go in a state of like nervous disorder. In other words, he could speed somebody's heart up, make them feel hot, make them feel cold, make them feel nervous, make them feel fear, yet they didn't know why.
Yeah, and I believe Jesse Ventura had a show about this, and they demonstrated it on that show.
Yes. It's a very simple process. And now, you know, when I showed through my book that Tesla's technology and the fact that he could, he exposed these ELF waves and how they can be broadcast from tower to tower and used for energy, but at the same time, those towers could actually be used to cover the earth with electromagnetic waves that would actually penetrate your antenna. And now that we have got, just think of all the cell towers and all the satellites that do nothing but beam back to the earth all this information, it would be nothing to turn those things on full force and literally have people going mad. When you are exposed to a stimulus that you can't stop, and I've used this example many times. I sometimes have a problem with caffeine. Well, if I drink caffeine, then my heart will speed up. Until it wears off, I can't stop it. It's just going to keep doing it. And this is the same thing. If something's being beamed at you, biologically, you can't stop it. So you are losing control over your body. And if somebody can have that kind of power to flip a switch and control humanity, then we get a greater understanding how these people who rule the world don't have to have a huge army. They have the technology. And the fact that Satan says, the Bible says that Satan is the covering cherub, he was actually the covering cherub, and he was first in command over everything. So he is no idiot, and he is, his powers are far greater than any human's powers could ever be. So you think about, if he's got a lineage here and he is dealing with those people and working with those people, and we know that demons are real, the Bible specifically tells us when Jesus walked the earth that he talked to the demons talked back to Jesus, they knew Jesus even when the Jews didn't even know Jesus. These demons knew him. And they actually said, "Oh, why are you here? You came before the time." They even know that there's a time frame that this earth is going to go through before it's kind of like all said and done and the jig's up. So when people say, "Well, I heard something go bump in the night," you probably did. You thought you saw a ghost? You probably did. And that, I've always said people who are out there looking for ghosts, it's kind of like they want to hunt for them, but they don't want to find one of them.
Right.
It's kind of like, here we go, and we're going down through the tunnels, and all of a sudden we hear this strange noise, and people are like, and they run, and go try to hide. I'm telling you that my research proves that all this stuff is very real. I think about, the oracle sites, and I've mentioned this before in other radio shows, is that when these mediums would set up these oracle sites, and a good example is the witch at Endor, when King Saul went to her and wanted to conjure up Samuel. And of course, that was totally against what God said. The Bible didn't tell us that necromancy, conjuring spirits, and talking to the dead were impossible. It said we couldn't cross over. In Lazarus and the rich man, they could see. In fact, Lazarus could see Abraham far off. And Abraham could see the rich man, and Lazarus was with Abraham. They could see the rich man burning in hell. He was asking them, let him come down here and dip his finger in water and cool my tongue. These things are very real in the spiritual realm because you're able to see certain things like that. But people who don't want to face the reality that if we're going to look for ghosts, then you got to say, the Bible's already told you it's real. They do exist. And when that witch at Endor brought up Samuel, the Bible doesn't say it wasn't Samuel. It says they talked to Samuel. And the problem was, since King Saul did that, then of course he lost favor with God because God said, you don't do this. You're dealing with an element that was created that's not a part of what humanity was supposed to be a part of. The spiritual realm that we can cross into is the lowest spiritual realm. So if you try to conjure, you're conjuring up those kinds of things. You're actually bringing them to the table. Seances can do it. You can use a Ouija board, and it is really true. You are conjuring up, but what you're conjuring up is not the element of God's spiritual area. You're conjuring up the part that is actually where Satan and his minions and his demons exist. We can never go into the third heaven. The only way we can get up to God is when he comes down to us. And when he came down and he took John and Patmos and he carried him up and he saw these things, when he did that with Daniel, Daniel was not, he was in prayer. He wasn't doing meditation over an oracle site. You can't get to God the wrong way. The Bible tells you try to climb up another way and enter in. That's like a thief. You're not going to get there. What you're going to get when you do those things is you're going to get an answer in the spiritual realm. I mean, that's a perfect example of what Hitler was doing in his little areas that he called Camelot. They were doing remote viewing. I mean, it's documented. There's case study of all this kind
America
of stuff.
was doing it too.
Talking with these people. He was learning from that spiritual realm. It's real. It does exist, but the problem is, the moment you encounter and you become a part of that, Royce, they own you. Because the more that you do that and you subject your pineal gland to it, the more it opens up to Satan. It's like a party line. You've got an antenna that was created by God in your head to have communion with him and his Holy Spirit. You start mixing in and playing your game to do your thing and be God-like, and the only connection you're getting is Satan. And once Satan can get in there, he's going to block your ability to have communion with your Creator. And that's why those 144,000 at the end of time have got to be sealed by God, because he has the capability to block it. He is going to become so powerful at the end of time that you would not even be able to understand the truth from the lie. And we're almost there, because if you look around you on the news media, you're like, who's telling the truth? You'll hear one group tell you this and another group tell you that, and you'll go to a book and it's written about so-and-so and it's telling you something else. And before long, people go, I'm just totally exhausted. I don't have time to deal with it. I'm trying to just put food on my table.
Right. Now,
that's what Satan wants you to do.
I wanted to mention, if you pardon the interruption, that when you was talking about the 13 Satanic Bloodlines, people in the chat room wanted me to guide you back around there as soon as I could. They said they had chat questions on that. They were kind of interested in who these families were. I know because Mayred's asked were they the House of Windsor and Queen Elizabeth, and nobody else asked any others other than that so far. So go ahead and finish where you're at, but I was going to say, that way you can note, you know, in advance to come back around to that to answer that one.
Well, let's go ahead and we'll talk about that, because what this all involves is that there is a serpent lineage. Dan Brown brought it to the table when he started talking about the Merovingian bloodline. That bloodline was set up to bring about the Antichrist power one day, to be able to have the lineage in place to prove that they can walk into the temple newly built in Jerusalem and claim to be of the tribe of, really will be of Dan, but at the same time connecting themselves to King David. And the only way for the serpent group to do that is to kind of falsify and document and do whatever to make it look good on paper. And believe you me, They have got that down to a royal science to try to make it look exactly like it needs to look when they decide to put their guy on the throne there in Jerusalem. The intent has always been, since the beginning of time, that Satan would have a match. He parallels everything. That's the thing that's so interesting to me in doing this research. Everything he does, he parallels. For example, you had 12 bloodlines that were of Jacob that became Israel, renamed Israel, that became the Israelites. And what this 12 Illuminati, and became a 13 bloodline with this Merovingian, parallels those 12 bloodlines from Israel, because when Joseph, when he died, his two sons split his bloodline, and that gave them really 13 bloodlines as well. And when you see that Satan is trying to keep in other words, God created a lineage that's going to come up to 144,000 of the 12 tribes, because one of them, Dan, won't be a part of that. Those 12 tribes will produce 12,000 people who what the Bible calls virgins. What is meant by that is pureness, and this goes back to, again, to the pureness of Eve, that you're supposed to remain pure, and that's why Noah was considered pure. That's why the lineage had to come from Adam and Eve to their son Seth, and then down to Noah, and then down from Noah to Abraham, and from Abraham to David, and from David to Mary, to keep that line a pure line. Well, there has also remained 144,000 that will be at the end of time that have stayed with that same pure bloodline. But to mimic the pureness of God's lineage, Satan has his 13. And that's where I'm saying that those people also have the pureness of the serpent in them. The rest of us are we're kind of mixed in between. Now, some people say, well, Joy, does that mean if we have any of those other traits, can we not get to heaven? And I try to explain it like this. Only the serpent lineage of those 13 Illuminati bloodlines, the true pureness of those lines, never, ever will ever enter the gates of heaven. They're in a fallen state, and they would never say, Lord, forgive me. They are just like Cain. God told him, he said, if you don't get yourself together here, you're going to follow right into your father's lineage. He was talking about Satan. And people say, well, he gave him the chance to redeem himself. Cain never said, Lord, I'm sorry I killed Abel. The Lord told him. He says, your brother's blood cries from the ground. He knew what Cain had done. Cain was no idiot. He knew that he was talking to the Lord. He never once acknowledged God as the Creator. He never asked for forgiveness. He was too worried about getting killed. He was worried about his punishment, but not about forgiveness. And that is where the difference is in the genetic makeup of the serpent. Satan never says, oh, by the way, God, I'm sorry that I rebelled in heaven. That's never going to happen. And this lineage that's the serpent lineage will never ask for forgiveness. So if somebody's listening out there and you say, well, I'm distantly kin to the Windsors or whoever, if you are and you're wanting to know if you can be saved, you have anything to worry about, because the people who are of serpent lineage will never, ever be concerned of that. They never will want to be saved because they know they can never be saved. And that's the difference between that pure lineage and us and the pure lineage of God. So that's why the Bible tells us that there is no such thing now as Jew or Gentile. That when Jesus came and was on the cross and he died, he brought in the age of grace for all of humanity. But that same group will never, that I'm talking about, these 13 Illuminati bloodlines, they're never going to ask. They're proud of what they are. In fact, you know, if you think about the Rockefellers and people like that, when you come down on them, they'll say, well, I'm glad to know that we're putting in the New World Order. They don't ever deny it. They're like, we're happy that people think we're doing it because that's what we're doing. And Rockefeller's, you know, there's plenty of quotes out there that he's made about that. They are pushing our world to an agenda that Satan has established a long, long time ago. I mean, it's his family bringing these things about. And they know what they're doing. They know that they're living in the days of this earth and that there's going to come a time when they're all going to end up in hell. They know that. And if they can take as many of us that they can confuse or cause us to lose our souls, they're going to do that. They are not our friends. Satan is not your friend. And these lineages that rule the world, they're not our friends. They are using us for their time here to do their thing. And we're kind of victims, and it's sad because we tend to forget that we are living in a fallen world.
Okay.
And it's not something that until it's all rectified and goes back into the days of you know, us being able to go back to paradise if we choose that direction. But we've got to make that choice. We have got to choose. God is not going to take us back into paradise if we don't want to be there. And he gives us that free will. Do we want to do this with him? Are we listening to him? Or do we want to follow a fallen being? I mean, that's why Satan fell, and the people that, you know, the angels that fell with him followed in that line. They didn't want to do what God said. They didn't want to live it the way God had intended and had created it. And we have to make that decision. That's why it becomes an individual choice every day of our life. Do we follow good or do we follow evil? But we cannot mix it. In other words, you can't do some good and then turn around and do some evil, because that's not going to get you where you need to go. You've got to make up your mind to try to do it good. And if you end up messing up, you get on your knees and say, forgive me. And God promises that forgiveness time and time and time again. But there's an evil force here with us, and if you're not aware of that, and if you don't understand the game plan, you can just get sucked down the tubes by their control, because that control is getting worse and worse and worse. And like I say, being able to use the pineal gland against us, that is a coming thing. I mean, it's already being done with video games, you know, certain TV programs. There's subliminal kinds of messages going on. There are people that are hearing strange humming noises and things like that. Harmonic vibration is being played out. I mean, you can hear it all over the internet where people are saying, well, I hear these strange noises, hear these strange noises. As this vibrational change of the earth starts happening, I mean, we can already see it's affecting the animals. Birds don't know where to fly. They use that gland to migrate and know where they need to go. That's how God created them, to stay on path and to do their thing. We got fish in the wrong places. We got fish that shouldn't be on this side of the world over in some of the, you know, Mediterranean area, and vice versa. And you got birds that don't know how to migrate and they're flocking together. I mean, if it's already affecting the birds, it's really affecting humanity. There are a lot of people sick, and they don't know why, and they'll blame it. Oh, well, it was just, you know, this kind of condition or that kind. People are sick because we are just like those birds on the fish.
Okay.
But news media is not letting that be known.
I was going to say that we got a few questions going on around here. You may want to take a minute and address these before they build up too much. I've been kind of accumulating, so I didn't mean to be rude there. Pardon me. It's that season around here when everything starts growing.
That's right.
Okay, now one of the questions come from my wife. She wants to know, is the Antichrist here yet?
Yes, he is here. And the thing that's most interesting to me is that I wanted to know, again, how he was going to fake everybody out and make people believe that he was Jesus Christ. And going back to the cloning issue, when I found out that there had been blood taken from the shroud back in the early days, even when the Stirrup Committee was doing that, and that the shroud was actually owned by people who had been connected to the Knights Templar, who had connections to Hitler. That let me know that there was already a plan to bring something to pass into understanding that blood. And when I began doing the research on it, people would say, oh, but it was dried and it's degraded and it can't be brought back, and just all kinds of, there's no way to do this, no way to do that. And then, of course, we've learned that we can, bring back mammoths and everything else. In fact, they've been looking at mummies and tissue samples and stuff like that so they can regrow all those, what we call ancient things, back in today's world. And you stop and think, and the Shroud of Turin is only like 2,000 years old. It's not as old as a mammoth. It's not as old as a mummy and all of that nature. But I think the thing that really kind of helped solidify what I was trying to say is that God's blood is a total different ball game. And Ron Wyatt did some research and came up with the fact that he had come across the Ark of the Covenant, and he had gotten some blood from the Ark of the Covenant off the mercy seat, and when it was tested, it actually showed that the blood could be brought to life. It was still alive. And that has always been my play, that the blood on the shroud has never been dead any time, that the blood is alive. And
I saw that video by Ron White, by the way. And the one thing I haven't been able to find out yet is whether or not his claim has actually been confirmed.
Well, they always wanted to say that, that there was questions about that, but I find this very interesting. The man was dying. When you're dying and you're about to meet your maker, would you want to be telling a lie? He never, ever, ever said that what he had originally stated was false. And when he told how that blood was alive, if you watch his videos, the man breaks up. He actually cries, and it's not a fake cry. I fully believe that blood is very much alive because it's Christ's blood, and I believe that blood on that shroud is very much alive. And if you do it and put it in the, and you stir it and you heat it and you do the things that Ron did, you're going to see that blood is in fact really alive. It's not dead. And when it's not dead, then it's like you and I being alive right here, being able to clone us is nothing. We take that cell, pop it in a woman's cleaned out egg, put it in a woman and let it grow 9 months, and when it pops out, it's going to be identical to whoever it came from. If it was me or you, it's going to be identical image to us. And the Bible says that beast that comes at the end of days is an icon. And that icon image, the only icon image that could ever look like Jesus, would be his clone. And I think that's why, really, John the Revelator used the term icon, because it means statue. In other words, it's an image identical, yet it's not real in the fact that it's not human. But that would be the only way for him to identify that to us, would be like if we went out and we made a statue of ourselves, it would be that it looked like us, but it really was not us. And I think that's why Jesus tried to tell those people time and time again, when they say, I'm over here, and they say, I'm over there, don't go, because that is the Antichrist. And the fact that there is a man on this earth whose lineage matches the tribe of Dan, who the Bible says the serpent will come from, that has power, and that he has the image of Jesus, and he matches that image. My question has always been, since I started pointing the fingers at the royal family and what they were up to, is why is he in the image? It's not for a photo shoot. It's not like a celebrity look-alike contest. This guy's in the image. And he has the pedigree that the Bible says that the serpent is going to use to, come to power as this beast at the end of time. And, you can't deny the fact. He has everything that the Bible has told us is going to happen at the end of time. The power, he has the people behind him, he has the blood lineage, he has the rights to walk into the temple there in Jerusalem and claim that he is a descendant of King David. he has everything in order. And my book, Eden, shows it. Everything from the moment that this royal family was working for so long. I mean, it's not like they just kind of came up with an idea real quick. This has been a plan of Satan's for a long time, and that's why I try to take people in my book, Eden, from the beginning to show you this lineage, how it's moved through history, right on up today. So that, if you don't believe me, you trace it back. Because when you trace it back, you're going to find out that what I'm telling you is the truth. And so if the Bible's telling us that this man is going to come from this lineage, and he's going to be an icon, and he's going to be an image, and he's going to be called a beast, and of course we know that the serpent was called the beast of the field, and we also know from the Jewish Talmud that there was such things as beasts of the field that were male and female, that were human, which I believe is first part of Genesis, but it did not have a soul, because when God created Adam, he blew in him the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So if you take an animal or whatever that doesn't have a living soul, so to say, and it's just a vehicle, then the beast is a vehicle. It's in an image, it's in a form, it's in an icon, it's in a statue-like appearance that looks like Jesus. Or why would Jesus say, don't pay attention to this man that's going to look like me and claim to be me? And that's exactly what's happening right before our eyes.
That kind of leads to my wife's next question. She wanted to know who the Antichrist is.
Yes. The person that I say that matches the shroud the best is Prince William, who is, of course, in line to be king. And, there's always been the question as to why Charles did not marry for so long when he loved Camilla from way back. And I've done the research in Eden and I proved that relationship had been going on and was still going on when he even married Diana. But the requirements for the Antichrist, you've got to look at what the Antichrist has to be and lineage-wise to be able to pull this off. Diana's lineage is what they had to have to be able to connect William to be able to walk into the temple in Jerusalem and claim the rights of the throne there, because they can tie themselves back to King David. And the person that walks in there has to have those ties. Now, supposedly back in 70 A.D. when that temple was destroyed, no one was supposed to be able to trace themselves back anymore, because those genetic, pedigrees or whatever were supposed to be supposedly burned. But there is some indication that even with the Vaticans and some of the stuff that they supposedly have there, that they have something that does say that there is a connecting factor between those royal families. But the thing that's interesting to me most is that they pull it from this Merovingian bloodline. And if you do any research on the Merovingians, you find that it's a play that Jesus did not die on the cross, but that he lived and married Mary Magdalene, and that they had children, and that bloodline actually came with Joseph of Arimathea over into England. And that's why you've got all these songs and things about England, in that they're going to rebuild Jerusalem, and the connection to Jesus and that kind of stuff is real prevalent there. And it's always been that Queen Elizabeth, even when she took her oath, they have always said that they would give up their throne the moment Jesus appeared. And it's very interesting to me that she's made comment and comment again that William seems to be like that, the person that she wants to give up her throne to. And, people say, well, would he take it over Charles? Well, we know that, there's been past people who, when they married wrongly, then they stepped aside, and they passed the throne on. So people say, well, would Charles do that? Charles is playing the part of the red dragon that Revelation tells us about, that will help the beast inform his power, and then, of course, the false prophet being the Vatican and the Pope, because when you have to look at this is that St. Malachi's prophecies of the Pope, if people don't understand that, they need to read those prophecies, because there's only going to be one more Pope after Benedict, and everything has been lined up just perfect, but the last Pope is going to be Peter the Roman. And Peter the Roman is an interesting figure because what Malachi is saying is that he essentially is going to hand over the keys to the Antichrist. And I find it interesting that no other Pope has ever taken the name of Peter because they never felt they could live up to what they believe is the first Pope. And the Catholic Church believes that's Peter because supposedly they take the scripture and say that upon this rock I build my church.
Yeah, I got a
In fact,
big
that was God talking
that.
to him.
I think that was a big, misquote of the Bible.
Yes. I mean, God was talking. I mean, Jesus was talking about himself.
Well, I thought Jesus was talking about he was going to build his church on the people who were filled with the Holy Spirit, Jesus the Christ, the anointed.
Well, and the thing about it is, they've taken it and put it on Peter. I mean, we're talking about Peter. Peter's the one that denied Christ 3 times. He tried to walk on the water and he sank in the water. I mean, I don't think he would have built his church on that. But the thing about it is the fact that this last Pope's going to take that name. That means that once everything is united under this world umbrella of religion, which they're working on quite well, the process of that is just coming together just like it should. What's going to happen is when they put this man into the temple, Peter is going to walk in there and give him the keys to the kingdom, because you can't have Jesus, who supposedly, according to the Catholic Church, gave it to Peter. If Jesus shows back up, then Peter can't be the head guy anymore, because he's supposed to be the vicar of Christ. Well, if Christ is in the presence of Peter, then Peter would have to give the keys back. And that's exactly what he's going to do. He's going to give the keys of the kingdom back to its rightful supposed owner, which is the Antichrist, because the kingdom of this world is Satan. When Jesus left from here and he went up into heaven, he said he's going to come back, but he's not coming back as another human being and be born. Unfortunately, people who believe in Judaism and those people who are waiting for Christ to show up, they're going to be sucked down the tubes.
They're going to be waiting for a while.
They're going to believe it. They're going to believe it. It's the Bible tells us they're going to believe it. It's the greatest deception the world will ever see, because the person standing in this image with the power of Satan will heal people. He'll bring fire down from heaven. He'll know the future. Supposedly, he'll make things happen. Satan has the power to do those things. That's why he's so good at messing us up. He's a step ahead of the ball game. He knows a little bit ahead of time, just like the demons looked at Jesus and said, "Why did you come before the time?" They knew that there's a time. Satan knows there's a time. He has the power to see ahead. He knows the game plan. So it's not something that is a fake. It's a real live human being with powers generated from within that is not human. And if you took a human being and let's say that Satan tried to possess him, because the Bible tells us the number 666 is a man's number. It does not say that it's not a man. It says it's a man. So if it was just a human like you and I, and Satan can, possess people, demons can possess people, but the problem is that if you choose to exercise that demon or you choose to follow Christ, that demon can't stay there. It cannot live within you unless you let it stay there. The moment that you turn your life to Christ, evil flees. You can't do one or the other. Either you're one way or one the other way. But the moment you choose Christ, then that demon can't stay around. There's no way that the Antichrist could afford that to happen. If let's just say, he inhabited some guy down the block, and that guy becomes very powerful, but then he goes, oh my goodness, I don't like the way this is heading. I don't want it to do this. Then he would have an internal conflict going on between a spiritual being of a soul that lives in all of us, that God created with the breath of life, and himself. And it would be an internal fight. That can never happen with the Antichrist. So that tells you that this being, this man, doesn't have a soul for Satan to live within him, like he's living within him. And that, that's the thing, is that when the power starts to manifest, if you think about in the Catholic Church where you've had like statues of Mary or Jesus that would bleed tears, and people would run to those places, make pilgrimages there, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people would be healed, and people would say it was of God. Well, the Bible tells us never to go to an idol, never to build an idol to look like anything in heaven and earth, never worship an idol. So that tells you that Satan has been using this for a long time to bring about people who will look to a live statue and be overcome. Because, Royce, today, there are people who are sick and dying. This world is getting in a bad situation. People can't look around and just see what the sun's doing, and you can see how the weather is doing, and all the stuff is going to get worse and worse. I mean, here we are in the first part of March in my area of the country, and we're already hitting in the high 80 degrees. What is summertime going to bring? 120, 130 degrees? Where are we headed? When people get so distraught and things keep getting worse and money gets less and all these things start just manifesting like the Bible says, the guy that walks up there and says, hey guys, if you come down here and you take this little thing and put in your body, this little chip, and you're going to follow me, I can make your flesh not die, and I can make you live forever. Your family won't have to die. You won't have to have cancer. You won't have to have this, this, and this. You tell me how many people wouldn't be lined up. They'll never stop and think about their soul. When people panic, they become animalistic. They don't think. And Satan knows that. And the day is coming when people in this country are going to panic so bad that nobody will care for the fellow man. It will be self only. And that one trait is the thing that Satan loves. Because the moment he makes you put yourself first, he has you.
Which that's already where the world's already at now, if you ask me.
It is. That's why I'm trying to warn people that we are so close to what's about to happen. And the fact that William is in the image of that shroud.
But you think he's a clone, right?
He'd have to be a clone. The thing that's interesting to me, there's a lot of things that I bring up in Eden that make me truly believe that he is. And of course, he's going to look at the whole 9 yards. You cannot tell the difference between a clone. In fact, the USDA, FDA, a couple of years ago in Prevention Magazine, they said that they clone cows. And the clone cows, if you eat their meat, it's no different than the regular cow. And if you drink their milk, it's no different than the regular milk. In fact, that's probably already being mixed in, and people don't even realize they're drinking clone milk and eating clone meat. So the thing is, you can't tell the difference. The thing that's most interesting that people need to stop and think, you have a soul. You can't touch it. You can't see it. But it is inside of you. And when you die, it leaves your body. Now, people who have had near-death experiences, even with their children, the children are the best. They will describe that when they're out of the body, that they still look like themselves. But yet they can look down and see their dead body laying down there, yet they're in a body. And their body's the same as that's down there.
At least in appearance.
That's right. It's in appearance. And we know when Jesus, when he resurrected, he walked on the earth and he ate. But he was not in a body like you and I, but nobody didn't go, well, you don't look like yourself, or you don't do this, or whatever. He absolutely went before the 500 different people, and he ate with them, and he talked with them. He still looked like himself. Now, that being the case, you wouldn't be able to tell something was a clone, that they would be different. There's no way to do that. The beasts of the field looked like male and female. They looked human. That kind of thing is it goes beyond science fiction, and some people, it's very difficult because you're taking it to an element of, I guess, a transgenic being. And this is something, when I started thinking about this, it reminded me of things on Star Trek. and it's the fact is that we're living it. And they perfected all of this a long time ago before they got ready to do what's been done. William himself, the birth timing, the fact that he was born on the summer solstice, June 21st, 1982, the fact that he will be 30 years old at the 30 London Olympics, the fact that he is the son of who he is, the fact of his lineage of where it's at. When he was actually christened there in Buckingham Palace, he actually howled when they put the River Jordan water on him. And, of course, everything that I've ever read about people who have a demon inside of them, they're going to howl when you sprinkle them with holy water. It was something that was done in a private ceremony. So the windows blew open, and supposedly a storm came up. I mean, there's just all kinds of weird things. The fact that his name is William, and it ends in I am, and that is the thing that was always, God's name. And the fact that Charles always wanted to name William Arthur because of the connection to King Arthur. And, of course, Diana just had a fit. She was not going to name him Arthur, but if you look at Will I Am Arthur, his name says that, Will I Am Arthur. And there's just a lot of connecting factors to the way that Diana died, the memorials to her, how they're set up. They even look like an egg that's being punctured in a petri dish, the way you clone something. I mean, there's just too many things that have been said. In fact, I even mentioned this in Eden, that when Princess Diana did an interview with Jane Pauley on TV, and I watched that with great interest, and she just about told everybody, I was a birthing chamber. I was used. These people she called them lizards. I mean, she couldn't have been saying any more specific words for people. The problem was they wanted her dead because she was telling everybody what was going on. Unfortunately, Christian people don't understand doublespeak. You're not taught it because secret societies teach their members this. Those people that are involved with what I call the Orders of the Serpent, they know how to go on TV and say all this stuff right in front of you and I, and because we're so stupid, we sit there and it doesn't even ring a bell. Once you understand doublespeak and you understand the symbols, then you can pick up on the game that's being played right before your eyes. One of the perfect movies that's out there was Eyes Wide Shut. If people have not seen that movie with Tom Cruise, it is absolutely an explanation of the game of secret societies and how they use these things, saying one thing when it's absolutely something else. I've studied it so much that I can watch things like the Olympics or like the Grammys. The recent thing with football game the other night that they had Madonna. Every bit of what Madonna did was esoterically programmed and plan to the T. And most people who didn't see that or didn't understand that said, oh, great performance. But it was an indoctrination. If you go back and look at the Grammys, and if you go back and look at the girl that came out in the red dress with the Pope, and then she did the Roman thing where supposedly she was being exorcised. I mean, here we are having a black mass on TV for children to watch. The more you watch that, the more it ingrains into you until you don't react to it. This is a part of the process of Satan controlling you. Years ago, Royce, if that kind of stuff had been on TV when I was a little girl, people would have quit buying any product that TV program would have had up as the people who were sponsoring. They would have shut them down. In our little town, if something like that happened, they didn't go to that man's business. They stayed away from him because they were taught in the Bible, just like Moses was, you kill all that, because if you let that infiltrate you, then once the infiltration happens, Satan has more and more and more control over you. There was a day that if somebody had said an ugly word on TV, people would have turned the channels off. And even when I was a little girl, I remember Johnny Cash came out with a song named Boy Named Sue. And at the very end of that song, he said an ugly word. And they recorded the song, but when it got to the ugly word, it went beep, bleeded it out. It played it on the radio. There was a bleed there. You didn't get to hear that. Now, you think about rap music, the rock music, you watch any TV program, and there's very few TV programs that you can watch today that don't use ugly words, that don't have something to say sexually, that don't really go against what the Bible is telling us don't do. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And when people try to stand up and say something right, I know that Kirk Cameron that has done a lot of things with, movies and stuff now that he is a Christian.
You're breaking up. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I thought you might want to know that.
Okay. Can you hear me better?
That's a little better.
Okay. Kirk Cameron has had to encounter some things because he's come forward and made comments in regard to his beliefs about marriage. Well, if you look at the Bible, God created Adam and Eve, and he married them to produce after their kind. If you don't follow that, you are not following the will of God. If you are outside the will of God, you're going to have to go through judgment. And the outcome won't be good. And if I were to say, well, yeah, it's okay if you want to like this person, or, if you want to have a girlfriend and you're a girl and a boyfriend, or two guys married and two girls married, it's not that I don't like you. If I turn around and say, have you read the Bible? Do you understand that if you do this, you are outside the will of God? And that God's book says once you get outside the will, you're no different than the serpent with Eve. That was outside the will of God. But people are jumping down people's throats by telling the truth. And this is the thing that worries me. As people get afraid to stand up for the truth, then it leaves Satan an open door to make these people think, oh, you can do whatever you want to do. It's your life. Yes, it's your life. But what most people don't stop and think is you have a soul, and that soul is going to live forever. And near-death experiences prove it, just like I said before. Those people have seen themselves. They were in another dimension. They saw their dead bodies. And I always, in my book, I explain it like this. Once you create a sperm and an egg together, it electrifies when the two come together. That's why you are an electrical being. That's why electromagnetic things work on us as humans. That's why we're affected by electromagnetic waves. That is why when somebody dies, they hit you with electrical pallets to make you come back and make that heart start beating again. You are a form of energy. Once energy is made, according to the law of thermodynamics, it can never not exist. It will exist forever. That means that when you go through judgment, if you don't get into paradise, you're going to spend an eternity in something else. Now, just understanding the holographic nature of one cell of our body recreating our flesh again, you could literally, in real time, if you're God, cause you to remanifest your flesh and die again. And you could die over and over and over and over in hellfire. So if this makes things it's just lights out, if you don't believe in the end, it's not that way. And science has proved it. God has already told us, but science has proven that. So when you start thinking about, I've got a soul, this body's only going to last 120 years, unless, they come up with they're looking for the death gene thing and to stop the death gene, and flesh can live, but then it won't die, which is very interesting because the Bible tells us at the end there will be some who cannot die, and they'll be longing to die because in death, it allows you to not have the pain. But if you can't die, that pain's just going to be on and on and on and on. So, it's something to really ponder in your mind. Is it worth playing the field and playing your own game for 120 years, maybe if you live that long? What is that compared to eternity? Is it worth it? And I think that's the reason I have spent so much time, because I had people in my lifetime who are now deceased that I felt did not understand that. And it is my mission to make people aware of what's going on, to know the truth, and to make an informed decision. Because one day you're going to be called into judgment for the decisions you've made. And you can't go there and go, well, I just didn't think about it, or I didn't care, or I didn't know. We all know right from wrong. That pineal gland was put there for us to know right from wrong. When you were a little kid, the moment you did something wrong, you knew it. As an adult, when you do something wrong, you know it. That right there is your ability that God put within us, that little element of guilt, to get yourself on the right order. If you choose not to do it, everything that you think, do, or say, whether it's in your closet or not, it is recorded. And I will honestly tell you, having done work with people, and especially with putting them under hypnosis, you can put a person in hypnosis, they can recall everything back as far as you want to go. They can tell you what day it is, what color shirt they had on, who was sitting in their first grade class in front of them, what clothes they had on, what was the person sitting behind them, what their name was. It's all there. And if you stop and think how man has been able to take a computer and keep up with us, think about all the people in this world and how the computers are keeping up with everything. If man can come up with that, what do you think the Creator has the capability of doing? So if, people think, well, I did so-and-so and nobody will ever know and that didn't hurt anybody. Stop and think. Is it going to hurt you? Because in the end, that's really what this is all about. Do you want a future that's eternity for good, the way the Creator really established Garden of Eden to be? Or do you want to live in a fallen state away from your Creator? And I don't think God wants that. I think He truly is trying and has given us this element of guilt when we do wrong to know to straighten it out. And if you don't, then you don't have any excuse. And I guess it bothers me. It bothers me because I thought in my lifetime, had I died before I had done this research, would I have made it into heaven, playing the game, thinking, oh, well, that probably wasn't too bad. Oh, that was a slide. Oh, everybody's doing it. Why is that going to hurt me?
When you think about
God's a good God. You know,
how many people die every day that go to church every Sunday and every Wednesday and don't realize they're not going to heaven.
That's right, and that's where I felt like I had been doing that. I felt like I was trying to do right, but yet when I got to the point of this research, I looked back and I thought to myself, I was lost, and I didn't know it. I thought I was saved, but I was lost. And it worries me, because I know that Satan keeps people so caught up. Well, it's a game, and it really does. My research really is very serious, and it's one of those things that I am very passionate about, because I know the naiveness that Eve had. I relate to that. I totally relate to what happened to Eve. She trusted something that she thought was good, because Satan mixes good with evil. And I think about in my lifetime how I have trusted people that I thought were good and then just got really stabbed in the back. And it hurt so bad, and I would be like, why didn't I see that? So I know that there was an element that Eve was like, why did I do that? Why didn't I see this? And I just feel like if people don't understand the game that Satan plays, and the sexual game from Eden to today, that is the easiest way to ruin children, through sexual molestation, just anything that has, where you take away a child's innocence. Once you have a sexual encounter, that innocence is gone. You can't ever bring it back. It's gone. And so many people in our world today have been abused so bad as children, and Satan uses that. You'll find that in most of the initiation ceremonies, satanic ceremonies, that's the first thing they incorporate, is sex, because sex in the wrong manner locks you down. It makes you feel like, I can never come back, I can never be forgiven, and it plays on itself. It's one of the worst things that can happen to you as a child. And having counseled people who have gone through molestation, it's a terrible, terrible thing, and many times it builds on it. Once they were molested, and they molest, and it just goes on. It's a vicious cycle. But taking away innocence is a crucial thing in our society, and you cannot turn on the TV or listen to music or watch music videos that's just not being played to the hilt, to be on your mind. And if you go back and read the good book, that was not supposed to be a part of this. The sexual act between a man and a woman is nothing like an animal. Their sexual acts are different than humanity. A man and a woman were supposed to be like the bride and the bride of Christ, where there was pureness between them, that they never looked at anybody else. There's no such thing as adultery. If you really get down to the basics, true marriage, a true marriage, is exactly the way we were supposed to be created to be with our Creator. And very few of us have ever lived our life like that. I haven't, and I'm sure the majority of 99% of the world hasn't. Thank goodness that Christ came, got up on the cross, and that we have the ability to say, Father, I have committed these sins. I ask for forgiveness, and our sins are forgiven. If we didn't have that, we would just, the thought process of not having redemption, now that I've done this research, is mind-boggling to the nth degree, how a creator would have sent his son into this world to do what had to be done to get us out of the mess we created, by messing with the serpent in the garden. And it's only going to get worse, Royce. It's not going to get better. Our temptations today, like I say, when I was a little girl, the temptations that I encountered and the people that were around me encountered are nothing like they are today. Nothing like they are today. So for us to fight the good fight, to try to stay in line, it requires you every day Every day, the moment you do something wrong, and that little voice inside of you says, "No, you shouldn't have done that. You need to get that right. You need to get it right then. You don't need to wait. You don't need to hang on it. You don't need to pout. You need to get it right then, because I am telling you from my research, you don't want to have that brought up to you one day. You just don't want to do it. It's not the thing to do. And if you have mistreated somebody or whatever, you need to read what the good book says. Do what it says, do. And in the end, then paradise will be yours. But if you think that it's not real, and you think you're going to get out of something, it's not going to happen. The Creator created this to go through a process, and we are going through it. And we're moving fast to that area, because the Bible says in the end of time, the end of days will be like a woman with birth pains. And I heard a governor on TV the other day say, "Oh, well, these tornadoes, they happen all the time. You know, we've always had tornadoes." Have you had tornadoes like this day after day at this level of intensity, of this level of destruction? No. Never in the history of humanity have we seen this. And as it gets worse and worse, and I know they don't want people to panic, but if you understand the Bible and you understand the day in which we are living, then you can learn and cope with what's happening, because you know. But for those people who are lost, they're going to become like animals. They're going to become savages. They're going to become totally out of control. And if you don't have that hope and that knowledge of understanding why you're here, why we've got to go through this, why these days are happening,
right,
what the plan is, you physically will fall apart. I mean, that's why people drink and take drugs. They can't deal with this kind of stuff. And if they think it's bad now, that's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, 80 degrees right now, what's summer going to bring? It was already, it hit 112, 113, 114 here last year. So I'm saying 120, 125, 130. What are we going to see? The Bible tells us in the end of days that it's going to be hot. I mean, I'm not saying this. I'm trying to say this is what the Bible's saying. If you don't believe me, read Revelation. It's there, black and white. If the Bible's not true, then why is it happening? I guess is my other thing.
Okay, now, Dr. Joy, I was going to mention that we got like 13 minutes left in the show, and I wanted to tell everybody real quick, I wanted to thank them for coming and being a part of the show, because, if you don't do nothing but listening, you're participating. You couldn't have a show without your listeners anymore. You can have one without your guests. It's a radio show's a participating part from everybody that does their perspective parts. And I also want to remind everybody to come back Saturday, and I'm going to be talking to Rand Flam if I got the name right, and I may be pronouncing him incorrectly, or Flam Oth, and he's got a book out called Atlantis Beneath the Ice, and he's going to tell us why he believes that the continent of Atlantis can be found underneath the Antarctica. I also want to invite everybody to join my friends over at United Paranormal International. And I've really recently made some new friends, folks, that a lot of you guys may or may not be interested in. I'm going to be putting up a sponsor link for y'all to be able to find them. But they're about alien and UFO abductions. And I realize that some people, frown on aliens, and some people will say that they're the gods of the Old Testament, and some people say the gods of the Old Testament were demons from another dimension, and I'm sure, Dr. Joy, you ran into everything I'm talking about. But the thing is, these people do have the site. They're friendly people. They got a social network, and they're trying to learn, and they're just looking for information, same as anybody else right now. And, it doesn't hurt to look for information until you have to go through the bad information before you get to the good. Isn't that right?
I've read a lot of books. I agree.
So, at any rate, I wanted to say, during the last 11 minutes, though, is there anything that you would like to, add to this here, last-minute thoughts or anything like that? Oh, your website, again, because I meant to mention it just now, and I think I just forgot to do it again.
Yes, My website is www.drjoye.com. And all my books and my music and videos and YouTubes and all that kind of stuff is right there. The link you can just click on and you can really peruse all the information and research that I'm even doing in other areas. Because my work is a broad range of information. Because I want to bring it all to the table. I want to actually prove that science and religion, instead of being two separate entities, are actually proven that what the Bible has always said is true. And unfortunately, Satan has always liked to separate science and religion so that we don't know the truth. In other words, we can't see the forest for the trees. And so I'm actually bringing back the focus so that you can see the trees.
Okay.
That's what I'm after, is to try to bring all those things together. And you know, all the things that I'll be doing as far as appearances and other shows and things, they can follow me there. And there's also, if they have any questions, they can send me an email and I'll answer those questions. And like I say, and then hopefully in a couple, maybe 6 months or more, I don't know how long it'll take for my new book to get out, but maybe they can keep checking the website because I'll have it listed when it's available with some of my more expanded research. But I do hope that they'll consider getting a copy of Eden and understanding the basis of the foundation of the information that I'm building on, to hopefully answer questions, those tough questions that they may be having. And like I say, it has everything in Eden, from the fallen angels to the UFOs to the animal mutilations to Tesla to cloning. I mean, you name it, there's not anything that's not listed in Eden. The changes in the sun, moon, and stars, the way the huge cathedrals are laid out on this earth, and the oracle sites. I mean, everything is listed in my book Eden that you might have an interest in.
Okay. Well, I want everybody to know also, I've got the link to it's linked to it at Amazon, but I got a copy of that link on my front page, and well, it won't be there tomorrow. I'm going to move it to the archive tomorrow to make room for Saturday's show, but still it will be in my archive with our show, our show description, her picture, and everything you need to know about this here to make an informed decision as to whether or not you'd like to purchase the book. And you can click from my site right over to Amazon. And I will be putting this up at YouTube and Daily Motion and some other places like that in video format. So I can't link a book over there, but, you know, it can guide some people to the site and give more people a chance to hear that wasn't able to make it tonight. And I want to apologize to listeners that had asked some questions that y'all had to go. And I know you didn't hear the end of the show. You don't hear me now, but if you listen to the archives, you'll pick this up, that you didn't get a chance to wait for your question to be asked. And I never did ask it since you went ahead and left. And hopefully, Dr. Joy, you can come back again in the future, say sometime after June, since I'm booked in June, and maybe we can go a little further in depth on this.
Oh, I would love to, Royce. I've enjoyed being on your show, and like I say, would enjoy coming back and talking more, because there are so many things that is in the book that we didn't even touch on tonight. So, yes, there's many, many more shows that I could do with you on just Eden and some of the different fields of study that are there. So I would really appreciate you asking me to come back later on.
Okay, that sounds like a winner to me. And with that one, I guess we can go ahead and wrap all this tonight. And I'll be in touch over the next couple of days with you, Joy, and to send you the links to where I posted all these shows at it. It'll be about 4 or 5 links, something like that.
Okay.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming. I really enjoyed talking to you. It's been a very interesting time for me. But I do have a kid that wants me to get him up in time to go to work tomorrow, so I guess I better get some rest behind me.
Well, listen, you have a good night, and God bless everyone that was here with us tonight.
Okay, you too now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, then. That was the end of that show, folks. And I'm fixing to cut off this thing all together. I've already hidden the chat room, so we can't get no more access into that tonight since I'm shutting down. I just wanted to once again remind everybody, because I didn't have those up in front of me a minute ago, that those sites I was telling you about, I've listed them as friends of mine, are Alien and UFO Community, Supernatural UFO, and United Paranormal International. And you got links on them. If you look to the left menu, down under Other, underneath the advertising link, it'll say Friends. If you click on that, you'll see 3 banners there, and those link directly to those sites if anybody's interested in checking them out. In the meantime, folks, I'm going to call it a good night. Don't forget to join me Saturday. Don't forget to tell everybody that the site's address is www.paranormalpalace.com, and I hope to see everybody then. Y'all have a good night.